Okay, we're on the hour right now, and I know there's a lot of information that Dr. Miller has to share, so I'm going to get us started with a couple of slides just to introduce, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Miller. I just want to point out that there is a little homepage for this presentation, and that website is on the screen right now, but I'm going to put that in the chat for you as soon as I can get to the chat. And I want to let you know that Stop Pest is a program of the Northeastern IPM Center. We're at Cornell University, but our funding comes from HUD's Office of Lead Hazard Control and Healthy Homes. And we provide, through that funding, free IPM training, integrated pest management training and consultation for HUD-assisted housing providers. If that's something you're interested in, we do online training, but we also come and do an in-person training too. So get a hold of me. You'll see my email, or I'll be in chat, and let me know if that's something that you would like more information about. I also have to say that there will be products, vendors, and commercial services, I'm sure, pictured or mentioned. They are meant as illustrative purposes, not as endorsements. I want to let you know also that we have Stop Pest has a website at stoppest.org, and there's a tremendous amount of resources on the website for pest management, specifically for affordable housing. And right under the news you can use, you see we have an online integrated pest management course coming up in June, starting this Thursday. It's every Thursday for the month of June, and we cover one pest each week. They're about an hour and a half long sessions, and click on the website and you'll find that under online course, or right on the blog post that's featured there. You can find more information or contact me, but feel free to use the materials on the website. I'm going to do some quick introductions. We are really happy to have with us today Dr. Dini Miller. She's a professor of entomology at Virginia Tech, and also the Urban Pest Management Extension Specialist for the entire state of Virginia. Through that role, she promotes safe and effective pest control through research, publications, training, and presentations, and much, much more. I could list her degrees and her academic achievements, her many awards, her publications, but for the purpose of this presentation, what I want to let you know about Dini Miller is that since 2004, she's really been focused on some of the most challenging pest management issues out there. That's bed bugs and cockroaches in affordable housing. And Dini doesn't work just in the lab. She's doing field work in these actual locations, in public housing, in affordable housing, and providing actual real relief to some people that have probably been living with pest infestations for months or even years. So her perspective comes from real world field experience. One of the reasons why she's such a sought after speaker, and we should feel so lucky to have her today with Stop Pests, and internationally too, she speaks all over the world. But I think one of the reasons that we love to hear Dini speak is because she combines a really great passion with hard science to find solutions that actually work, and she believes in these solutions. So I'm really looking forward to your presentation today, Dini, and I'm excited to learn about assessment-based pest management, and everyone bear with us as I'm going to stop sharing and Dini's going to share her presentation, but while we just switch over presenters, I would love for you to get in the chat and share with us an introduction. So Dini, you can share your presentation now.
Okay, thank you so much. And thanks for that introduction, and thanks for inviting me. I am on a mission to get specifically US HUD to change their pest control methods and how they fund pest control. So we'll be talking about that today. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So let me go ahead and get my screen up. Okay. So great. I guess to start off, one of the things I want to talk about really is, we're not just talking about assessment-based pest management for German cockroaches, but also the cost of pest control and what we are seeing in public housing, and basically what we've seen for like the last 30 years. So my title for today is Why We Must Pay for Pest Control not just pesticide application. And I'm making a case for this assessment-based pest management. I want to point out this windowsill that you can see here on the right, and this is one of my public housing authorities that we work in regularly. And what you can see there is about 17 German cockroach egg cases in that windowsill. Now, do cockroaches hang out in windowsills because they really like bright, sunny locations? Or is it because all of the good dark cockroach cracks and crevices in this particular apartment are already full? And realize each of those egg cases there have between 14 and 52 German cockroach embryos in them that are going to immediately hatch as soon as the mother drops them off. So this is really increasing the population. And these are the conditions that we see people living in our US HUD housing facilities on a regular basis. These really large cockroach infestations have existed for a very long time. And inexplicably, I am not able to forward my slides. Don't ask me why that is. Okay, did you help me, Susanna, somehow? Or did that just work? Well, we'll see.
No, I didn't touch anything.
Huh, I wonder what that was. Okay.
Try using maybe your keyboard to advance the slides rather than the mouse, maybe.
All right, maybe that will be the way to do it. I'm just trying to see I can't see the top of my slides because of all of the stuff that's up there. Okay, let me talk to you a little bit about the origin of that term, integrated pest management. And no disrespect, Susanna, but I'm looking at a way of changing that because I want everybody to realize that the term integrated pest management was actually developed for agriculture, not the urban environment. And to a large degree, it doesn't necessarily suit us exactly either. So this is something I want to talk about. Where did this term integrated pest management come from? Well, realize in the 1950s, there was a discussion among farmers, okay, about an overdependence on pesticides after World War II, mainly DDT and all of its, relative chemistries. And what had happened as this had led, the over application had led to insecticide resistance. So we had selected for those insects in crops that were not susceptible to DDT anymore. And all of a sudden we had a problem with these mutant insects basically eating farmers' crops. And because of these insecticide applications, all of their natural enemies, the other insects that might have eaten them, had disappeared because they'd been eliminated due to the insecticide use. And so now farmers were kind of stuck with all these mutant pests and they weren't able to control them. Well, in the 1960s, of course, Rachel Carson publishes Silent Spring, and then the public becomes alerted to the problems associated with the use of DDT and its other chemistries that were being used in the environment at that time, causing damage to predatory bird eggs and things like that. And so people started to get very concerned about the overuse of insecticides in the environment. Well, in the 1970s, then, agricultural producers began to come up with a new methodology of applying pesticides on their crops, and it was called integrated pest management, or IPM. And the idea was that this was an economical and environmentally sound practice of managing pesticide resistance. Okay, so it wasn't about cleaning up the environment so much as it was about eliminating the development of these mutant pests that they could no longer control. And that's what IPM was actually about. So the farmers wouldn't lose money anymore. I'm trying it. I don't know how to make it go forward using the other buttons.
Just the right arrow on your keyboard, try.
Right arrow, I'm trying. Not working.
I don't know what could be happening.
I don't either. How strange. No. Huh, I'm so sorry, everybody. Hang on. We'll figure it out.
And we even
There, all of a sudden,
practiced.
after 10 different, pressing 10 different things. Okay. Well, realize that applied integrated pest management, the way that it was applied, oops, now look at that, involved a series
Caught
of
up.
steps. Okay, so this wasn't just one single methodology, it required a series of steps. And the first thing the farmer would do, this was the first part of integrated pest management, is they would go out and basically scout or survey a portion of their crop to identify what pests were out there and how many there were of them. Okay. And based on their experience and everything, they actually have metrics called the economic injury level, or the EIL. So even farmers today will go out, scout their crop, and they know the number of pests that will cause them to have crop damage and cause them to lose money come harvest time. Now, if for some reason they have fewer pests than the ones that are going to cause damage and cause them to lose money, they may not apply a pesticide because that takes money and time as well. So they're going out there and using this economic injury level to help them make decisions as to whether they need to make a pesticide application or not. Now, there's also the economic threshold level. If a farmer goes out and looks at the number of pests on their crop in April, say, and they know that that particular pest is going to increase its numbers, and that in August, that low number of pests will actually start to cause damage right before harvest time, then they may decide that it's worth their time and money to make a pesticide application in April so that they don't have that explosion of pests come August, which causes them to lose money. So farmers today use this economic injury level and the economic threshold level to reduce the pests to what they call a manageable level. Well, that's very interesting when you think about it. A manageable level. That means that they can still have pests in the crop, but if it's below a certain level, they know they're not going to lose money. And they may go and scout their crop again after they make a pesticide application just to ensure that the pests have been reduced. So they're out there assessing the size of the population. Well, in the urban environment, we have been interested in integrated pest management, but we really haven't used it the same way. And most people, when you talk to them, don't understand the way integrated pest management was actually intended, which is, again, used in agriculture. But again, most people are unwilling to live with any insect pests at all, particularly bed bugs, but they're going to still want the least expensive treatment. Now, some U.S. organizations like U.S. HUD or the EPA have an interest in integrated pest management, but if you go and read their websites, you can see that they have very little knowledge about what it actually involves. Okay. And realize too that feelings about pesticide use in the home can be very variable depending on where you live or who is living there. And let me just give you an example. You know, I'm from Southern California, where people used to worry about pesticides in the home like crazy. And here in the state of Virginia, where I live now, it's quite different, Northern Virginia versus Southeastern Virginia. So if I go into somebody's home and I'm working there in Southeastern or Southwestern Virginia, people will say to me, "Oh, honey, you just do whatever it takes to get rid of them old bugs. I'll be over here cleaning my gun, okay?" You know, so it's do whatever it takes. Now, if I go to Northern Virginia, I could have somebody come to me and say, "Well, I see you're putting out all of those baits for cockroaches. Can you make sure that you're not putting them in locations where my dog might get at them? You know, will those pesticides be dangerous for my dog to have in the house?" So very, very different feelings about pesticide use. And realize too, when we get into the urban environment, this whole scouting or assessment seems to disappear when we're talking about integrated pest management. We don't typically see that done. So urban IPM has sort of morphed into this belief that it's a low toxicity or non-toxic pest control procedure that is carried out by a licensed pest control operator. Now, I have to ask, do you apartment managers that are out there care about integrated pest management? Well, I do a lot of training for apartment managers, and some of them are like, well, it's not my money. The owner has to pay for that. Thank goodness it's not my home. I don't have all those pests. But here's the typical fallback. The reason that the residents have pests is because they don't clean up. So it's typically blamed on the residents that why they have cockroaches or bed bugs these days at all. And I just want to point out, this is to show you how much U.S. HUD managers might know about IPM. And this is just a quote from a contract that one of the facilities we've been working at quite a bit in the last, 10 to 20 years. And it says, this housing authority, this is their request for bids. This housing authority requires an integrated pest management approach to pest control that is environmentally friendly, environmentally pest control friendly methods, which are not toxic to humans. Okay. Now, this is interesting that that's put in there. That's not what integrated pest management is about. And realize, because of the Food Quality Protection Act of 1996 and the regulations with the EPA, we are not allowed to apply anything that has observable effects of any kind in an indoor environment. And that is on each and every pesticide label. But just to show you another example of how these contracts really show pest control operators that they don't understand what integrated pest management is here you see they wanted environmentally pest control methods, but then they suggest in 2018 products like caramates. Well, first of all, that's misspelled. It's carbamates. And realize that carbamates were banned from indoor use since 1996. And another suggested type of chemistry that was put into the contract request for bids was organic phosphates. Well, it's organophosphates. And again, these were banned for indoor use since 1996. Okay. And I just want to point out again, this picture on the right, this is the typical situation that we see in public housing. These are the places I work, and I took that picture. Well, okay, how did we get started down this path to assessment-based pest management? And so I need to tell you a little bit about how I run my lab. I have a 20% research appointment and 70% extension appointment. So I need to be able to spend 70% of my time taking university research out to people who can use it as part of their job. And one of the ways that I support my laboratory and support my graduate students is by testing new products out in the field to see how well they work. So companies like MGK or Syngenta will come to me and say, oh, we have a new cockroach bait. We'd really like to test it out in the field and see how well it performs. Well, one of the favorite places to work in is U.S. HUD housing, because it's very well known that the cockroach populations out in these facilities are just outrageous. And you could talk to any researcher in this country who's been working out there for the last 30 years, and they can tell you exactly what the situation is. Like, yes, if you want to test a new product, then you definitely want to work in U.S. HUD housing. Well, one of the problems in U.S. HUD housing, first of all, is the German cockroach populations have major resistance to most of the spray formulations that we have for use indoors. And the reason for this is that these products are 50 years old and they have been used regularly in HUD housing. So we've killed all the all the cockroaches that are susceptible to these products. And what we have left are these genetic mutants that are not. Okay, so I was going to go out there and be testing baits. And one of the things about baits is we have to get the cockroaches to eat them. And the general understanding at this time when we were starting this was that if the cockroaches had alternative food sources, like if people had food laying around and things like that on their kitchen counters and things, that the cockroaches would be less inclined to eat the bait. So typically when you have a pest control company come into public housing, all the residents get notification that they need to empty their cabinets and also clean up any food and everything so that they can go in there and treat for cockroaches. Well, when I started working on these bait studies, I was told by the management that I couldn't ask for the residents to clean up. And the reason was they weren't paying me to work there. This was just pure research, so they didn't feel like it was appropriate to ask the residents to help us out. So we didn't have any resident cleanup. All the food was going to be out there that was on the kitchen counters when we were testing the baits. I didn't realize what a benefit this ultimately was, but I'll share it with you when we get there. So realize when we started working in this particular housing facility here in Virginia, they were under contract with a pest control company who came once every 3 months to their units. But when we went in there, we just saw amazing numbers of cockroaches. And let me just get a close up here of the kitchen drawer. Look at all those cockroach egg cases in there. Now, the resident didn't go and collect every single cockroach egg case they had in their house and decide to put it in this kitchen drawer. So this just lets you know how many insects existed in that home. And again, 14 to 52 embryos in every one of their any one of those egg cases. And if you think about how many mother cockroaches did it take to produce all those egg cases, and how many boyfriends did they have to produce all of those egg cases as well? So these places are really, really infested. For my master's and PhD at the University of Florida, I studied German cockroach aggregation pheromone, and that is one of the pheromones that's found in German cockroach feces. So I always like to joke that I'm a German cockroach crap specialist. But here you can see the buildup of German cockroach feces, and this is the counter or the cabinet underneath the sink. And you can see that these feces have just built up years and years. So there's a lot of cockroach poop in these locations as well. Now, that picture on the left is an upstairs closet that was pretty much empty, except for all the cockroaches that it had. And you notice the resident has put down some mothballs, but you can see that those mothballs are really not having any effect on the cockroaches. The cockroaches are doing just fine. And one of the reasons that we think that there's so many cockroaches up here in this particular space is that they're undisturbed relatively. There really wasn't anything in there. Now, if you look at the picture on the right, this is an important thing to be aware of. German cockroaches, all that debris that you see there are cockroach feces, cockroach shed skins, dead cockroach bodies. You have egg cases, but that's just the cockroach debris that's collected pretty much since like 1971. And if you think about it, here in the state of Virginia, during the wintertime, people tend to close up their homes, turn on the heat, and all of that material you see there is going to dry out, and particles will become airborne. And then people start breathing it. So we're breathing all of these cockroach, particles that are in the air that can contain cockroach allergens. And this is one of the reasons that having German cockroaches is known to be the cause of asthma and allergies in inner city children. But you can see how much debris is there, and imagine how many allergens must be contained in all of that debris. Now, if you look at this picture, this is one kitchen that we were working in where they had removed, the apartment managers had removed all of the kitchen cabinetry and all of that brown stuff back there. What is that? Well, that's the cockroach feces that have accumulated over the last decade or so. Now, the question always is, are they going to clean that out? No, they're not. They're going to paint over it. So realize any of the cockroach allergens that are contained in those feces will not be removed. They will be painted over. And I walk into a lot of these homes and we'll flip on the light switch, and the light switch looks very nice and white and looks perfectly fine, but it's got kind of a granular texture. And that is because the light switches have been painted over multiple times and all the cockroach feces are underneath there. So these are the conditions that the humans are living in these facilities. Well, why isn't management more on top of this? Well, one of the reasons is I've found out, because I do a lot of training and working and interacting with US HUD managers, is they really don't have any understanding of integrated pest management. And that's because they're not specialists in pest control and they take care of many, many other apartment aspects. But I would say now is going to be the time that we start getting familiar with this. And one of the things that we found out is there's been no assessment of building infestation levels ever done, and years, even decades, have gone by. So managers often have no idea that their units are so infested with German cockroaches, and they don't require their pest control company to give them any data on how many cockroaches exists in these different units. Management also does not require records indicating that there's fewer cockroaches after treatment than before. Okay. And I think this is something we need to definitely do going forward. And long-term pest issues have been continuously blamed on the resident. And what I mean by this is, even if the resident complains that the pest control company came and they still have cockroaches, then the pest control company will typically say to the managers, well, the residents don't clean up. And then the managers will say, oh, well, the residents don't clean up. So if you're not cleaning your house, what can we do? But I promise you, the problem these days is really resistance to our spray formulation insecticides. And that is where the problem comes in, when a pest control company comes in, applies something, and then leaves, and the problem is still there. And I'd say the biggest problem really is this lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Okay. And this is required by US HUD for apartment managers to be able to select their pest control company. Okay. And I had to call up US HUD to ask them what they meant by responsible bidder. And they had to tell me they needed to get off the phone and call me back the next day because they weren't exactly sure. But theoretically, it's supposed to be for the management to be able to write in what they want the responsible bidder to do. Like, you could require your company to give you information on how many cockroaches are in each of your units. That could be part of being the responsible bidder. You could require your pest control company, as part of the bidding process, to wear pink shirts anytime they're on your property so everybody could recognize them as at a distance. But typically, managers assume that the lowest responsible and responsive bidder is a company that is licensed in the state and also has certified pesticide applicators doing the pesticide application on their property. Well, that's everybody who's going to bid. Okay. So that reduces it to the lowest bidder, typically, who is hired. And we typically don't see anybody ask for any type of assessment. And part of the reason for that is because these companies that are working for $5 a door don't have time to assess the size of the population. Now, realize too, spray application is the primary treatment. But in this particular case, because of this resistance, most of the managers are paying for pesticide application only, not pest control. So keep that in mind. So realize I was working at one facility, Richmond Rehabilitation and Housing Authority, and realized that they paid $6 a door for pest control. Theoretically, it was more like pesticide application in 2010. That same housing authority paid $5.44 a door in 2020. Can you think of any other type of maintenance that would get cheaper over a decade than it had been previously. That does not make any sense at all. And of course, these are the populations that we saw in there. So that picture on the left was under the kitchen cabinets that we could see in the kitchen. Picture on the right, they had paid to put laminate, basically a plastic laminate, vinyl laminate over the broken tiles in bathrooms. And the cockroaches were getting in between that laminate and the bathroom tiles and making that a harborage area. And these guys were doing just great in these facilities. Well, everybody complains, well, the reason that the people have cockroaches is because of their poor sanitation. And yes, I have to agree, there's plenty of food for cockroaches laying out on this kitchen sink. There's no question about that. And in this place, you can see what the top of the stove looks like. It's harder to see that back skillet, but there has a bunch of meat in there. So that was food for the cockroaches as well. And in this home where we were working, these two young ladies that lived here left while we were doing our cockroach treatment. And you can see that they left plenty of food out for the cockroaches, and the cockroaches were just crawling around everywhere in here. So that is an issue. Well, how did we get down the path of this assessment-based pest management? When we were doing studies for chemical companies to find out the efficacy of their new bait formulations, we would go in and trap individual apartments to find the ones that are most infested that we could use in the study. And we'd take 3 sticky traps, and we'd have these big ones that are 3 inches by 6 inches with an adhesive surface in there. And we would place them in 3 locations. They'd be labeled A for above the sink, B for below the sink, and C for behind the toilet, or as somebody corrected me, behind the commode, okay? And we would just leave them out overnight. That's all, no longer than that. And the next day we'd come up and pick up the traps and count the cockroaches. And we would be able to use these trap counts to tell if one apartment was more infested than the one next door or the one down the street and that sort of thing. And that allowed us to find the most infested units to do our study. Now, I just want to point out, if you didn't know this, be aware that German cockroaches double, triple, and quadruple their populations during the summer months. And as you can see from this trap catch, we have all these little tiny baby cockroaches around the perimeter of this trap, and then the adults have walked over them to get to the center. Now, how many cockroaches do you think are in this trap? Okay. I always ask this question when I'm giving a live presentation, but this is over 1,300 cockroaches in this trap. How do I know this? I have counted them over and over. So this is overnight trap catch. This lets you know that the population in this particular apartment can be somewhere around 16,000 cockroaches, and they're under contract. Okay, when we were doing research, we would identify the most infested units, and then all of those apartment units would receive 30 grams of bait, or 1 entire tube of gel bait on day 1. And then I would put traps out on day 3 and day 7 to see how the populations were doing. But then day 14 was critical. We'd put the traps out overnight again. And if our overnight trap catch was still greater than 500 in all 3 traps, we would put out 2 additional tubes of bait, or 60 grams. If the trap catch was greater than 100, we put out 1 tube of bait, or 30 grams. 50 to 100, they got half a tube. If it was less than 50, then they would receive basically a quarter of a tube of bait. So that was standardized based on trap catch. Well, one of the things that we realized is because of the way the label says that you need to put this bait out in these 1/4 of a dime sized application, these little droplets, okay, that just took a ton of time. And of course, for your pest control company, time is money. And I've surveyed a lot of the pest control operators, and they're saying that their break-even cost is around $1.50 per minute. Well, if they're being paid $5 a door, the time constraints keep the technician from applying that large amount of bait. There's no way they could get 60 grams out in these little tiny droplets in all the cracks and crevices, in 5 minutes, basically. So if you look at that picture on the right, you see this is one of those quarter of a dime size placements that you see those 3 roaches around. Now there's a total of 7 cockroaches in this picture. If you look down at the bottom and to the side and things like that. And you realize that these guys are going to eat that, those 7 roaches are going to eat that entire bait placement. Well, what about the other 16,000 roaches in the apartment? You need to have a zillion of these bait placements out there to be able to get rid of them. But the technician doesn't have time to do this. So we tried to come up with a faster way. And here's one of the things that we actually did, just on the spur of the moment, thinking about it. I went to a grocery store and got cut-right wax paper that my grandmother used to use for baking. And we'd cut it into 2-inch by 2-inch squares, fold it on the diagonal, and then we would run a line of that bait down the crease. So here you can see on the right-hand side, this is my student Morgan, who is making a bunch of the baits so that they can be placed. And this is what I used to do in my hotel rooms late at night, is I would cut all this cut-right wax paper. Now, since it's used for baking, we think that they might have something in it that's very attractive to the cockroaches. We didn't think about it at the time, but we have reason to think that now. The other thing I would do is I would mark our bait tubes so we could just see where the end of it was and where half the tube was and where a quarter of the tube was. And then as we were making all of these bait placements, we could see how much bait we had put out. It wasn't exact, but it was very close. And we started calling these the bait tacos because that's what they look like. They have to be open so that the cockroaches have direct access to the bait, but it allowed us to place the baits just like the cracks or the pesticide label requires, into cracks and crevices without contaminating surfaces. And that turned out to be very, very convenient. Here you can see a couple of the bait tacos on top of this pipe that actually runs to the home next door that transports water from the kitchen from one location to another. And people had stacks of mail in their homes. And one of the things about these stacks of mail is they'd have all these German cockroaches living in between the envelopes. Well, you can't spray that with insecticide. You can't place bait directly on the envelopes, but we could make these tacos and put them in between those envelopes, and the cockroaches would come right to them and start feeding on it. And they really liked it. Okay. And we kind of found out there was something about that cut-right wax paper that attracted them. Not that they ate the paper, you notice the rest of the taco is there, but once we got them into the taco, they were very, very enthusiastic about eating the bait. And just take a look at this picture. This is in the middle of the day, and this is on top of a refrigerator in one of the units. And you can see in the front of this picture, there was a bunch of cooked rice that was in a tray that had just been placed on top of this refrigerator. But you can see we have 3 of the bait tacos in the immediate view. And I took this picture and I went and showed it to the manager, and they said, yeah, but how long did you have to wait to come back and take that picture? I'm like, we hadn't even left. The cockroaches came right out and went straight to the bait. So this bait seems to be very, not just the bait, but the wax paper seems to be very attractive to them. So everybody always asks me, excuse me, everybody always asks me, well, which bait is the best? Which one do they like the most? Well, when we first started down this path, we tried all of the commercial bait formulations because we were getting paid to do so. So we looked at Advion and Maxforce Magnum and Alpine and Vendetta, and guess what? They loved every single one of them. Now, if you look at that picture on the right, that's the way we traditionally place bait, in those little droplets. But look at how many of those roaches are coming. And again, this emphasizes how many of those droplets would you have to put out to feed all of the roaches that were there. And that's where the taco was very advantageous. And just some results from one of the other studies that we did, where we were testing Maxforce Magnum, Advion bait, and 3 test bait formulations that hadn't even come out to the market yet. And we had 6 units where we tested each of these bait formulations, and we trapped overnight, and we looked at trap catch then on day 3 and on day 7, you can see down here, and then day 14. So we fed them, and here was our trap catch was 100% to begin with, and it dropped to 60 to 80%, had dropped to 60 to 80% by day 3. And then that stayed about the same. And then day 14, again, now we're baiting them again. And you can see the populations dropped again by day 30, and by day 60, we had reduced the populations in those units by 90 to 98%. And that was all of the bait formulations. Now, I do want to point out the controls. So here we were just putting the traps out, and we were catching a significant number of roaches. So that did reduce the population. And again, we had 6 apartment units. But right here on day 14, one lady had put out some bug bombs, because she's like, oh, I've got to get rid of these roaches. I can't stand it. And that did lower the average considerably by about 50%. However, notice by day 30, it went right back up. So we really do want to get away from using these spray formulation insecticides, and realize bug bombs are the same thing. They just reduce the spray to finer particles. Same chemistry though. And we don't seem to be killing the cockroaches with that anymore. But the baits really do seem to work. Well, I started presenting this method to a lot of pest management companies and at scientific meetings, and even at meetings from housing, and I get to travel all over the world. So I've been talking about this just recently in the Bahamas and in Dubai and things like that. Well, US HUD actually took notice. Oh my goodness, thank goodness. And they asked me to write a model pest management contract with language for their facilities. And I have no idea where this went, because it just did not really go anywhere. But I wanted to point out that the pest control industry was very interested. In 2015, Ray Johnson, who was the president of the National Pest Management Association at that time, here you can see he is recommending the use of the bait tacos, but he doesn't like Mexican food, so he called it the cannoli. So it's Italian for him. Well, I have to thank StopPest.org, because they actually funded a research study for us to expand our research into 3 different US HUD housing facilities to see, if this was consistent, if this methodology really worked. And all of them had considerable cockroach issues. They all had pest control contracts with the lowest responsible bidder. They paid 3 different prices, and they had 3 different treatment protocols. So here on the bottom left, you can see that's Richmond Public Housing. On the top right, that was Hopewell Housing, which is also in Virginia. And then down on the bottom right, that is Rocky Mount Housing Authority in North Carolina. So we worked in those 3 over the next year. So again, first thing we did was went in there and trapped, and we were looking for getting 60 units at each site. So we went in there and trapped to find which ones had high, medium, and low level infestations, because we were going to see how we were able to do with different infestation levels. So you can see Ross is over there on the left-hand side putting out trap A. I'm picking up trap B the next day. Look at how many roaches I caught underneath that sink. And then, of course, I spend a lot of time in back of toilets in my job. So that was trap C. And what was amazing is just thinking all 3 of these facilities are under contract, and yet look at the cockroach populations that these residents are having to live with. And it was pretty appalling. Okay, well, I started talking to managers, and one thing I discovered in doing a lot of meetings with managers is that they actually think that they are paying for the pest control product. They do not take the technician's labor time into consideration. Okay, and this is what we're actually paying for, is labor time. And why? Because these sprays that are used, again, 50 years old, are pretty darn cheap. So you can pay $30 and you will get 20 gallons of formulated product out of that. 128 ounces essentially is in this gallon. And 11 ounces on average is what is applied in any particular apartment unit. So when you calculate the cost of those 11 ounces, your pest control company is using 3 to 12 cents worth of product in each unit. So what you're paying for is his time actually to be in there and make that application. And here's kind of the problem. Everybody I talk to, be it the residents, be it the managers, is that all humans seem to think the answer to insects is in sprays. Okay. But really, if we are trying to get rid of insects, we have to give credit to the technician, because we need somebody who's smart, who's going to make a decision, and an intelligent and educated decision as to what products really need to be used under these particular conditions. And the other problem that most humans know nothing about insecticide resistance. So again, we think the pest control operator must spray. And I will hear complaints from residents that have seen their pest control company come in and just bait, and they go, they didn't even spray anything. They don't realize that for German roaches and for bed bugs, which are highly resistant to our spray formulations, that we have to come up with other ideas. And realize too, a lot of times the sprays may make the cockroaches sick, but not kill them. So if your company uses a combination of spray and bait, a lot of those cockroaches may not feel like eating because they don't feel well, but then they will recover. So that's part of the problem. Well, in all three of these housing authorities, again, in talking to the management, they claimed that the whole problem was because the resident doesn't clean up. And of course, these are some pictures that we took inside of these facilities. And yes, there was a lot of trash in different places, like you can see here in this kitchen, all those paper plates and everything. But you notice they do have a broom and a rake, okay? And this is the upstairs hallway that's between the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom area. And you can see the bag of chips that's there. And that's one of the problems, is that there's a lot of food for the cockroaches. This particular bathroom, boy, I felt sorry for this lady. We were in there 4 months in a row just going through. And during that 4 months, the bathtub was completely clogged. And she had 2 children in diapers and another child that was maybe 5 years old or so. And they couldn't use that bathtub. And I was in there with the housing people. They saw it, but they said she hadn't called it in, so they just left it like that for the next 4 months. That was really tough. And when Ben Carson was the head of US HUD, he was quoted as saying, "Poverty is a state of mind." And I would love to invite Ben Carson, even to this day, to come and sit on this toilet and see if cockroaches are a state of mind, or if they were a state of his rear end when he sat here. That's one of the problems that these people are having to live with. Very, very challenging. And of course, everybody worried about sanitation. But one thing I want to point out to you in this kitchen is highly cluttered, but not really a lot of food sitting out. So sanitation wasn't the issue. And as far as putting out the bait tacos, this actually provided us with more cracks and crevices, like putting the tacos underneath the microwave and underneath that toaster and things like that. So it gave us a lot of opportunity to put the tacos out there if it's cluttered. Now, one thing we noticed, that the residents did a lot of their own pest control, but also remnants of previous pest control companies were still there. And here you can see the gel bait from 1998 that was used as a caulk pretty much behind the kitchen sink. And you can see that evidence was still there. We don't want to do that. And that was another advantage of using the bait tacos, is if it doesn't get eaten, we can pick it up and throw it away and not leave any pesticide residues behind. But this is something fairly typical that I saw in most of the residents' homes in public housing. And this is because the hired pest control company was not solving their cockroach problem, so they were doing it on their own. And I have to say, if you have to have 5 cans of spray, I don't think that's working either. And I don't know if Snap Punch is good for killing cockroaches, but they had that all together in one place. Okay, so what we did is we would go and put the traps in overnight and then pick the traps up, count what was in trap A, trap B, trap C, and that would determine for us how much bait we needed to put in each unit. Okay, so you can see Roy really enjoyed doing this kind of work. Shamika was kind of shocked at, me holding that trap. She really didn't like that as much, but we would record that. And one thing, pest control companies really don't have the time, based on the amount they get paid, to be able to count the roaches, but they could eyeball it, basically look at the 3 traps and determine whether they would be ranked as high, medium, or low. So that would again determine the amount of bait they needed to put out at the initiation of the test. And one thing I'm recommending is that your pest control company take a picture of those traps and only leave them out overnight. No leaving them there for 3 months. That's a waste of time. But take a picture of those traps and send them to the manager so that the manager has some idea of the infestation level that exists in each of these apartment units. And then based on that trap catch, we determine whether it is a high, medium, or low level infestation. So if you look at that picture on the bottom right, you can eyeball that and go, okay, that's a low level infestation. And basically you have 1 to 50 cockroaches would be considered low level, and they get 7.5 grams of bait, or a quarter of a tube. So you make enough tacos to use up that quarter of a tube and then place those in the cracks and crevices where the cockroaches are active. Now, medium infestation, you can see what that looks like in that picture that's above the one on the bottom. And that one would get 15 grams of bait, or half a tube. And then we have high level infestation, and then we have crazy level infestation, basically. So if we have more than 100 cockroaches, then that apartment would get a whole tube of bait. If we had more than 500 cockroaches, they're going to get 2 tubes of bait. And you can tell by looking at it. And again, take pictures of this and send it to the managers. All right, so our treatments when we were working in these 3 facilities is that we used one bait. In North Carolina, we used Advion Evolution, which was the Syngenta product. We used Vendetta Nitro by MGK let's see, that was Hopewell Housing. And we used Max Force Magnum in Richmond. And the reason we selected Max Force Magnum in Richmond is that was one of the bait formulations that their contract pest control company was using, and it wasn't working, and we didn't know why. So we wanted to see if there was a problem with the bait or whether the company just wasn't putting enough out. So we trapped overnight, and in those traps where we caught 0 to 24 cockroaches, we used those as our controls, where we would just monitor over time using the traps. If we caught 25 to 74 cockroaches in all 3 traps, they got a quarter of a tube of bait. 75 to 249, they got 15 grams or half a tube. If there was more than 250 on this first trip, then they'd get 30 grams or a whole tube of bait. And you can see in this picture with Mark on the right-hand side there that that trap is just absolutely full after overnight. And just so you can get a visual here, here's what the 15 grams of bait looks like. This is how many tacos that you get. So imagine for the 7.5 grams, it's about half of that. This is what the 30 grams of bait looks like. So we can see that that's what we use for the high units the first night. And then we'd come back 2 weeks later, put the traps out again, look at how many cockroaches we had. And again, if we had over 500, then they got 60 grams or 2 tubes. Over 130 grams or 1 tube. Trap catch was 50 to 100, they got half a tube. Or even if they had 1 to 50, they got a quarter of a tube of bait. And you got to make sure you have plenty of bait. This is what the 60 grams look like here. So that's a lot of tacos to put out, but there's plenty of roaches in there. And this is one of my favorite units to work in. This place was just insane, 1540 Coulter over there in Richmond. And so this is what the 60 grams of bait look like. Basically, we had to cover the washer twice to get all that out there. But while we were making the tacos, what I want to point out to you is that the roaches were coming and tasting the bait even before we put it out. Okay, so they were very interested in these bait formulations. And even if we used a different bait, they were still interested in coming and tasting it. So something about these wax papers were able to draw them in. And when they got to the bait, they were very attracted to it and willing to eat it. And again, this was out asking the resident to clean anything. Because when we first had started doing this, we were told we weren't allowed to ask them to clean. But when we got the grant from StopPest.org, we were actually going to try it without asking the resident to clean at all to see if we still were very successful. And that certainly seemed to be the case. Now, it did require that you get up in these hard to reach locations, because you can see all these pipes running through the wall. And a lot of times, if you go and look in some of these homes, the escutcheon plate where that pipe enters the wall has fallen away, after years. And there's all kinds of cockroach feces surrounding those pipes. So that tells you this is a place that you need to put these bait tacos. So a lot of times you have to climb up on the counters to get them up there. And you can see the cockroaches loved eating it. So we were able to collect all these wax papers and go, wow, these cockroaches are eating it up. Isn't that wonderful? And here you can see that the resident was always very thrilled when we were able to show them that the cockroaches were eating the bait, and we were really having an impact on the population. Now, what happened though, of course, is we have all these dead cockroach bodies everywhere, and this is just a mess. So we decided that vacuuming after we have all these dead bodies in place would be a good idea, just to eliminate the potential allergens that these dead bodies left behind. So again, you notice we had to climb on top of the cabinets and get up on the counters to be able to vacuum. And I had to do it first because the maintenance guys didn't want to do it until I showed them that they had to do it, because I was a little girly and they'd look ridiculous if they didn't. But I want to point out in that picture on the left, Nathan is holding up the vacuum hose, and you can see there is like a knee-high stocking that we have taken and stuffed down the vacuum hose and then put the attachment on to hold it in place. And that allowed us to vacuum up all of these dead bodies and debris and everything, and then not contaminate our vacuum. We could just pull out that knee-high stocking, tie it in a knot at the top, and throw it away, so that we got rid of all of that cockroach debris. Okay, here's some of our results, and I want to point this out to you. I don't know if I'm going to be able to move this thing up here, but this was Richmond housing, and this was by far the most challenging. What I want to point out is that the dark line are the ones that had the high level infestations. The dark gray line, the dashed line, those were medium, and then the light gray, those were the light infestations. Now, unfortunately, just because of the way the grant worked, we had to start this the worst time of year, which was like in the middle of summer. Okay, but we were still, again, remember the cockroaches double, triple, and quadruple their populations during the summer months. So that's the most challenging time. But you can see by the time we got to December, we got the high and medium level infestations almost, not quite, but almost eliminated. So one thing I want to point out about the low-level infestations, as it says up here, note that 5 of the 7 low-level infestation units had 100% cockroach elimination. However, 2 of the 7 low units had a 480% increase in trap catch. And basically that means that they went from 2 roaches in the traps to 9. Okay, and we found out that 2 of the apartment units had changed over, had new people living in there that possibly brought cockroaches from another unit in with them. But going from 2 to 9, that's no big deal. We would just have to continue baiting, for the next several months to get those under control. But I want to point out, we ran this study starting in June, going through December, and then here's January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. And we had those populations reduced by 90 and 97% in the high levels. Now, realize our heavy units during that time period received an average of 200 grams of bait. And I promise you, no pest control company has never applied that in a single unit ever before. Medium, 107, light, 86. And we had started off using the Max Force Magnum and then switched to Vendetta Nitro and then Advion Evolution. And I can't see it because it's in my way, so I don't know what the second, there it is, OptiGuard Cockroach, then Vendetta Nitro, then the Advion Evolution. So we used 4 different bait formulations, switching every 3 months. And that was critical because we don't want resistance to develop. And we have seen this happen with baits as well. So very important that we avoid resistance developing. And here I've had an easy time changing slides, and now it's stopping again, and I don't know why. There we go. Okay, then looking at Hopewell housing. Hopewell housing, we had even better success. So you can see we started off in June, the populations dropped, a little bit of bouncing around, but the high level units were actually one of the easiest to get under control. And you can see in this case, the heavy units received only an average of 82.5 grams. They were easier to knock out. The mediums were a little bit more persistent. So that took about 147 grams of bait, and then the light, 39 grams of bait. But this is going in there every month. And what I want to point out to you is by day 390, okay, so we'd gotten the populations down by December. And let's see, they were completely eliminated in the heavy units, but then January, February, March, we had eliminated the medium units, and we were still battling the last 1s and 2s in the light units, but we'd eliminated the roaches. And once we had them eliminated in the high and medium units, they didn't come back. And I had been told all my careers, if you don't get the resident to clean up and you get rid of the roaches, they'll just come back. And apparently that's not true. Okay, so this is something to take into consideration. Okay, as far as the bait formulations we used here, Vendetta Nitro, OptiGuard Cockroach, Max Force Magnum, and Advion Evolution. Again, switching every 3 months to avoid developing resistance. Well, the units that we had the best luck in, if I can switch slides, trying. I don't know why. Huh. Okay, was in the Rocky Mount Housing Authority. And you can see we started off in the summer, but by December, we had eliminated the cockroaches in the heavy, in the medium, and in the light units. Heavy received an average of 102 grams per unit, medium 91, light 34. But again, once we had eliminated them during the winter months, they never came back. And it's interesting because we just tried 2 bait formulations here, the OptiGuard Cockroach and Advion Evolution, and went back and forth every 3 months. I would still recommend throwing a 3rd one in there because that just seems a bit too risky to me. But notice that the heavy units received on average 102.5 grams, medium 91, and the lights 34 grams. But what I want to point out to you is without asking the resident to do any cleaning at all, we were able to eliminate the roaches. And in those 2 apartment complexes where we hadn't eliminated the low levels, if we were able to continue for another year, I promise you we could get them under control. And this is just what we're seeing out there. It's pretty amazing. So this was a 390-day study, okay? And we were monitoring and baiting every 30 days, not once every 3 months, every 30 days. And we were able to rotate our bait formulations every 90 days. We vacuumed to remove the bodies. We had no resident cleaning or preparation. And one of the things that we realized is we're bringing the cockroaches something to eat, it really is helpful not to disturb them in any way by doing any preparation or anything before you bring them snacks. So that really was an advantage, not having the residents doing any cleaning. Now, here's one thing. The residents were very much wanting to use their own sprays. And one of the advantages of not having the resident do any cleaning or having to be gone while we did the application is we were able to talk to the residents. So a lot of them I had to go up to and go, okay, I need you not to spray anything while we're trying to feed the cockroaches bait. And a lot of them would say, oh, but I've got to, I can't stand it, I've got to spray them. And I would say, okay, how about this? How about you don't spray anything for 3 days? And then I'm going to come back at the end of the month and I want you to tell me what you think. And boy, asking their opinion made all the difference. So not only did they not spray their cockroaches, they were very happy to tell us how well they thought it worked. And most of them were very satisfied with seeing so many dead cockroaches and also seeing all of those wax paper tacos being eaten through. Well, some things that we learned from this: the winter months are really the ideal time for major cockroach elimination. And if we get rid of them during the winter when they're not doubling, tripling, and quadrupling the population, we don't have any of these summer rebounds. So keep that in your mind. We really need to make our heroic efforts during the wintertime. The bait amount was determined by that overnight trap catch in the traps we were using. So no more guessing how much bait needs to be applied. We use the numbers, and then that dictates to us how much we need to put out there. And yes, we were applying more bait in every single unit than had ever been applied before, 34 grams to 200 grams over a 390-day period. And I just want to point out in these pictures that you see on the right-hand side, we now use a quilting machine that cuts the wax paper for us, so I don't have to sit around and cut up all those wax paper squares. This costs about $120. It's used for cutting up the blocks that people use when making quilts, so that made life much easier. Let me highly recommend that. Okay, looking at the prices, okay, realize our low line traps are about 81 cents a piece. So if we're using 3 of those in a unit, that's $2.43. A bait tube is about $6 each. So half a tube is $3 and a quarter of a tube is $1.50. And we looked at labor time in particular. And one of the things that we noticed is that our entry time, getting in the door, like knock, 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 wait, 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 knock, 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 wait, 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 knock, 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 wait, wait, use the key, try and get in. Hello, pest control, coming in. Then you'd hear somebody in the back, just a minute. Okay. That time adds to the cost. And you can see our average entry time to get in the door in the high level units was 44 seconds, medium level 42, low level for some reason the first day was 1 minute and 10 seconds. And even in those that had 0 trap catch, it was about 41 seconds. So you've got to think about the labor time calculated into that. Now, the time it took to place the traps went from about 43 seconds to 1 minute to get them in positions A, B, and C. Sometimes we had to move things around to get a place for them. Then come in the next day, and that ranged from 34 seconds to 1 minute and 7 seconds on average. Then picking up the traps and photographing them. That took between 1 minute and 21 seconds and 1 minute and 50 seconds. And then making the tacos, high level units where we had to make like the 60 grams took an average of 14 minutes, medium about 5 minutes, low about 2 minutes. And if they had 0 trap catch, we didn't make them. But realize that is all labor time. You need to take that into consideration. Now, the total cost to the pest control company in high level units, this was on average time across the 3 sites, the amount of time it took, putting out the 3 traps, how much bait it took, cost them about $39 a unit. That's with no profit whatsoever. So you've got to figure their profit in. So that would be about $60 a door, really, if they were going to make profit. Now, ask yourself, in your own home, If you had 16,000 cockroaches, would you think twice about paying $60 for a treatment? No. And a lot of these apartment units in US HUD housing are 1 to 3 bedrooms, upstairs, downstairs, kitchen, 8 by 12 food storage area, lots of areas that need to be treated. But once the cockroaches are gone, they're gone. And that price would go way down. Okay, medium units, the average cost to the pest control company would be $20, low $15, and zero trap catch about $8. And that was to come in, put the 3 traps out, pick them up the next day. So a lot of labor cost more than anything, but still, that's a reasonable price. So why are we paying $5 a door for the last 30 years for pest control? Do we really think that's what pest control costs? And how do we change this in the future so that we can achieve pest control? We know now we don't need resident cooperation, but we need to pay the pest control company. And realize you want to pay for pest control, not just pesticide application. And look at all those cockroach egg cases on that coffee maker. Okay, so why use assessment-based pest management? First of all, I think for the urban environment, we need our own terminology that lets all of our customers and everybody know that something's going to be assessed. We're actually going to get numbers. And the pest management professional really must assess so managers can be informed what's in their units. They need to know that. And our marriage to spray formulation has led to cockroach resistance, but everybody thinks we have to spray, and this has got to change. You know, we're not using dial phones anymore either. Let's move on to the next. Assessment needs to be the basis of urban integrated pest management, and no more time guessing how much bait to apply. We use the numbers. And realize failure to control cockroaches based on our data can no longer be blamed on the residents. We can totally eliminate these infestations. We have the power, and it doesn't take anything superhuman. And I just want to point out some pictures here. You can see what these apartments look like, and yet we were still able to eliminate, you know, the cockroaches that were there. We have zero trap catch here without any resident cleaning at all. So I'm going to end there and turn it back over to Susanna.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much. Okay, I have a number of questions. I'm going to get through them pretty quickly, but everyone, I want you to know that if you have to jump off, we are recording the session, and you can always go back to the website that I'm putting in the chat right now and look at the recording. I also am going to put, I thought of it a couple days ago, but forgot to put that example contract that you had created for us. It's on our website under examples of contracts, but it's not on this webinars page. So I'm going to put it on this webinars page, and I just put that in the chat. So let me get through some of these questions. Well, first I'm going to sum up a couple people's points. A couple people were asking about IGRs and the role that they play. I'm not sure if some of the baits that you were using had IGRs in them. Would you just speak about IGRs and their importance, or, you know, what's your thoughts?
Well, realize not all IGRs are the same. They're different active ingredients. They have different methodologies of either stopping the cockroaches from reproducing or stopping them from being able to molt correctly. Those are chitin synthesis inhibitors. We have reason to suspect, because of what we see out there, that some of the oldest IGRs that are used, like in the Gentrol point source that's placed usually under the stove, and you pull the stove out and there's 17 of them there because they've been there forever, that there may be some resistance to that, and that's something we're testing in the laboratory right now. But a lot of the newer formulations of insect growth regulators seem to work very well, and particularly in these baits when they're going to be ingested.
Okay, were there IGRs in any of the baits that you used?
Yes, some of the formulations that we had did have IGRs as part of their formulation. Great. I believe Vendetta Nitro was one of them, and I'll have to look at the other labels. But yes.
Okay, and then a lot of people asked about vacuuming, and I made the point in the chat that you were testing the efficacy of baits, so you probably didn't want to use vacuuming in these situations. But also, you know, the comments were, isn't this important? Yes, it is. And it also adds time onto
Right,
the
right.
technicians.
Well, let me say, I was a big, proponent of vacuuming, especially in the beginning of treatment. That's the way I used to think as part of integrated pest management, is that you went in there and vacuumed everything up first. But again, we don't want to disturb the cockroaches when we're using this APM method. And then we do have so many dead bodies as we work our way into it that the vacuuming really, in my opinion, becomes necessary. And yes, you'd have to make sure you're getting paid for that too, but I think it is an essential component. I just wouldn't use it first. Let's go in there, get rid of everybody, and then go in and vacuum that up.
Right. Kind of like what we're seeing now with bed bugs is maybe not disturbing the population prior to treatment is actually going to benefit us.
Right.
So Grace brings up something that I run into all the time, and I'm not sure there's a good answer for this. She says for tenants who have pest control professionals not using vacuums and don't own a vacuum, how do you clean up dead cockroaches? For me, if the resident can't do it and the pest control company's not doing it, that's something maybe maintenance can take on. But also you can clean up the droppings with just regular soapy, regular cleaning agent,
that may take you forever
Right.
based on what I see out there on a regular basis. But no, I think one of the most important things definitely is that you're, first of all, hire a pest control company where you write specifically in this low bid that vacuuming is going to be part of what they are going to do. Okay. So that is really essential. And we need to sort of get familiar enough with pest control that we take charge of what our pest control company is going to do, rather than to have some of these contracts that I've read where they're going to get treatment, whatever that means. Going to bring them snacks? I guess so. That's what I do. I bring them snacks, but it's bait. So definitely you want that vacuuming component included in there. Now, if people don't have access to vacuums and what have you, that's kind of unfortunate. It's not the end of the world. But yes, I would think maintenance would be the next thing I would look at.
Yeah. Okay. I have a bunch of comments, but I'm trying to weed through and get to the questions first. Oh, Juan asked about the taco method. Of course, everyone is worried about dogs and cats.
Mm-hmm.
Would you explain the safety precautions
Okay,
with dogs
so you're
and cats?
still applying those baits where the label says it's legal. Okay, now think about dogs and cats. When we're making those quarter of a dime size droplets, they could come lick those up anytime if we're putting them in locations where the dogs and cats can get at them. So definitely the pest control company needs to know you have dogs and cats, and they need to avoid putting those baits in places where the dogs and cats are likely to get them. Now they can still put them in cabinets and things that are low to the ground as long as they have closing doors, but just be aware. But,
Yeah.
If you put 60 grams of bait on the top of a kitchen sink, that wouldn't be a great idea if you have children. I don't have children because I don't like them, so I don't worry about that too much. But, but that might keep the dogs, out of it. But it's just getting enough bait placements, and they still have to follow the label and put them in those locations where they would not have contact with dogs, cats, or children.
Yeah, this was really eye-opening when I first learned about this study, because it's so common to see a pest control technician treating an entire building with one tube of bait, like stuck in his pocket, and going through every single unit, little dabs, little dabs. And it's very common to hear, well, we use baits, but they don't work. And that's why, they're not applying enough or they're not rotating.
That's right.
Okay,
That
so
is exactly right.
a couple more questions. This was just an interesting comment from Melissa. She said there was a school maintenance staff person who stopped waxing the floors because they thought the wax was attracting pests. And then we had a little side conversation, and I thought maybe there's soy in the wax. I don't know, but why that would be. That's just a little comment that I thought was interesting. Like they use soy in so much, maybe it's used in wax paper too.
Well, if it's German cockroaches, though, that's the thing. The roaches had to already be there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just now you're seeing them, maybe. And
right,
yeah, it could be soy. Who knows?
I don't know. Just we were musing about that. Okay, and Chris asked about Green Pro certified services, are there enough in the Eastern United States? Would that help? Is that a feasible um, option? And do you know anything about Green Pro certified technicians?
No, I don't.
Um,
No.
so I would say that
Green is a
when I
color, and
right,
my
well, the Green
experience
Pro.
has been that green is interpreted very differently from one company to the next.
Okay, so Green Pro is a certification program by the IPM Institute that supposedly certifies that the contractor is going to use more environmentally friendly methods. And I have tried to help, people find contractors with certifications if that's what they're looking for. And it's spotty. Definitely, there are some in bigger cities and not so much in rural, smaller areas. But I would say even when a company has a certification, that's not a guarantee that you're going to get the best service. I've worked with Quality Pro, which is another certification contractors, and that was the example that I just brought up where he had one tube of bait for the entire building. So those
Yeah.
certifications are great, but maybe you still want to know what's in your contract and you still want to have oversight. Okay, so Green Pro is NPMA certification. Thanks, Chris.
Mhm.
Green Shield is the IPM Institute certification. I
Yeah.
got those mixed up. And Quality Pro is NPMA. And those certifications might give you a little clue that this company is going to do some better practices, but you still need to oversee them.
Yes. Yes. And the thing is you need documentation of what is in the apartment units and of some reduction in the number of pests. And nobody tends to ask for that. Imagine a plumber coming in and putting some Drano Plus into a clogged toilet and then just walking out the door. And then later on, if that toilet still didn't work, then you called and complained and they said, well, what can we do? The resident keeps pooping in it, So we need documentation that what is being used is actually delivering the results that we need so that we know what we're getting for our money. And again, there's a big difference if you were to go under a class action lawsuit that bedbugs have totally opened the door for with German cockroaches. You need to demonstrate that you are getting pest control, not pesticide application only.
Right.
So very important.
A couple more quick ones. I want to just tell Nestle that she was asking about any suggestions or recommendations for people with mental health issues to cooperate. And that is a side conversation and probably a whole webinar in and of itself. So I would encourage you to get with me and go visit the resident help with residents page on our website and send me an email so we can have a more detailed conversation about that. But that is a tricky issue. I don't know if Dini, you want to say anything related to that?
I don't think I understand what the issue is. Is the resident being asked to prepare, or is it the resident choosing the pest control company? I'm not.
She said suggestions for managers that have residents with mental health issues to cooperate with management and pest control technicians.
Again, we shouldn't have our pest control technicians. If you're in there for German cockroaches using the APM method, we don't require the resident to leave or clean or pick up anything. Okay, that's the advantage of using this methodology. And believe me, I've been working in this industry for like 30 years, and residents have not cleaned better over that entire time, even though we've been preaching sanitation. So one of the reasons I was so interested in this APM is to take that resident element out. And we go in there and be able to get rid of the pests without having to ask the resident to do anything. So it shouldn't require any cooperation on their part. And that just makes life easier for everybody, even the pest control technician.
Good point. Good point. But Nestle, we can still have a side conversation on that because we have some resources on the website. But yeah, I like that answer a lot. Okay, so Melissa, I did see your question both times, and I was saving that for last because it's so good. But two more questions. Paula asks, do you know about the efficacy of avert flowable powder?
We are testing that right now. One of the issues that we've kind of had with it is, again, you place that and it never kind of goes away. You know, once you've got a powder in certain locations, we have not seen miraculous results with it yet. So I will be able to let you know, though, in the next few months, what we really think of that one. But we've really, because of the gel bait formulations and being easy to put in the tacos and easy to remove, that's been the easiest for us so far.
Okay. And our final, I saved it for last. So what happened after you finished the assessment monitoring? Do you have any idea what happened in these buildings? That was Melissa's question.
Well, not every one of them, but let me just say, we also ended up with a US HUD grant. And so we have been working in Richmond, Baltimore, and Hopewell again. And we started that grant in 2020 and were only able to work for 90 days before COVID shut us down. We couldn't be going into all these units and stuff like that. We weren't allowed to. And we had reduced those populations by about 90% in that 90 days. Then we weren't allowed to go back into those buildings until May of this past year. And again, we're back in those same facilities, working in a lot of those same units. And Richmond Housing just so happened to have, they've hired their own pest control people, but the populations were back where they were again, because we're starting in May and it was summertime. We've been able to knock them out again. Okay. But again, one of the things I haven't been able to test, which was part of the US HUD grant, was to just work on those populations during the winter and then see what happens. But we do recommend, regardless of whether you eliminate those populations or not, that you have somebody then on contract that is going in and putting those traps out overnight. At least every 3 months, and then just focus on those that actually have trap catch. And I think that will ultimately lower the price. But let me just say, in these facilities, if you've been paying $5 a door and you've been doing that the last 20 years, you've gotten an unreasonable discount forever. So it's time to pay for pest control. But then when they're knocked out, the price is going to go down. But you need that documentation. You have to have it.
Just recently, Steve Kells did a webinar for us last fall, and part of his data showed that there was just a small number of apartments that were taking the majority of the pest control time. So he had their pest control technicians who were in-house at this housing authority go into the worst first, we always say, and really solve the problems there. Once they solved the worst of the issues, then they had more time suddenly to do assessments of every unit or do the exclusion work or do the other things. It freed them up time, because a lot of times the infestation is coming from some of those really heavily infested units.
Well, and one of the things during the wintertime, one of the things on our proposal was to work on only the heavy units. So we were going to go out there and assess all of them, work on only the heavies during October, November, December, then mediums, January, February, March, and then lows, April, May, June, and then assess again during the summer and pick out those units that still needed attention and work on it that way. Again, time savings and money savings, same thing.
And I was going to close the questions, but I just want to give Chris a little airtime here, because he has a really interesting thought here or idea that I am not familiar with. It's Chris Geiger. He says, has anyone tried an insurance model for pest management that is flat monthly rate with requirement to keep pests at a certain low level? I'd say that I have not heard of that. And I think paying that flat monthly rate as insurance without the oversight, you might end up with the same issues. I don't know though, Chris, that's a new thought for me.
Well, and be aware of the warranty of habitability that exists in each state. Okay, so the owner of the building is 100% required to eliminate the pests. And if they choose not to do it based on some of the most recent litigation cases, you're going to be open for a class action lawsuit. So keeping things to a low level does not count in the urban environment. We're in the pest elimination business, honestly.
Well, Chris says two small companies have tried it out here, not in affordable housing though. So we'll keep our ears out
Yeah.
open for some more thoughts on that and more information. And I'd love to hear more about it, Chris.
Yeah. Again, what's an acceptable level of bed bugs?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've gone over time and I really appreciate that so many of the attendees stuck with us for the
Yes, and very
Q&A.
sweet of you all.
And
Yeah.
we learned so much and I really appreciate your time, Dini. We'll have the model contract and the recording of this webinar on the website and check back on the website. And there's been a whole bunch of thank yous, Dini. I will save the chat if you want to review that later. But thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you all
And
so much. Thank you all for being here.
thanks.
Yeah, and Susanna, I'll just need numbers on how many people attended. That's awesome.
Yep. We had 140 at the peak.
Perfect.
I'll be in
Wonderful.
touch.
Okay. All right. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thanks.